Of Valor. This is China's #1 versus China's #2, a fitting upper bracket final. Of course, the winner will qualify to those global finals, $100,000 and the free trip to the United States of America. That's what these teams have on the line here. Let's see if it's Skyline D or SunSky that comes out on top in game #1.
You know, Nagura, it's been a while. Actually, we haven't seen this dungeon at all this season. It's not, I would say, the most common dungeon, but right away out the gate. Now, I'm really going to be interested to see what Skyline D does in these dungeons with that double rogue comp. We already see them skip right past some of that first trash. We do know that some of their strat that we've seen yesterday, they really love kind of stealthing into position where they can just AoE grip everything together, which is kind of what we're seeing here right now, and let that triple melee comp really do work. One of the explosives does go off right away, though.
This is actually a very smart pull that they're doing there, because as the tank pulls the mobs, if no one else is in combat with the mobs, then they're actually not getting targeted by some of those very difficult abilities that those mobs are casting in this dungeon.
I mean, both teams right here, I mean, just in the blink of an eye, everything's been absolutely decimated. We were speaking about some of the more dangerous trash in this dungeon. Of course, those Thunder Callers, you want to make sure you move out with that debuff. That will AoE stun everything in its range, as we see one of the rogues there with the moon marker on Skyline D do just that. SunSky's already kind of done with the trash, so moving just a bit faster than Skyline D, getting ready now to pull this first boss.
Yeah, so we have the first boss who does one AoE ability quite frequently, which does a lot of damage, the Harna Valor. It does a lot of AoE damage, which is actually magic damage, so the armor actually doesn't really help you there.
Right, you are. He does also have that frontal that you have to be careful with, because you do have to move these lanes, across these lanes, depending where these dragons spawn from the side here. So by moving around, some of the melees sometimes get dragged in front of the bosses. They're trying to DPS move to safety, and of course they could get hit by that frontal cleave. These whirlwinds will of course decimate you with some nature damage if you manage to get nicked by them, so you got to be careful moving around. Now notice, important to note as well, that this boss does not actually need to be killed to 0%. You will finish the encounter at 10%, as he is actually technically a friendly mob, just kind of, you know, testing your combat prowess.
Yeah, so as you move the boss around to dodge the breath from the dragons, he also has a frontal cleave, and melees have to be quite careful when the boss gets moved around so they don't walk in front of the boss and actually die to this ability. Right,
you are. Another dragon going down here for SunSky in the meantime. Now, the trick here really is to see usually where that first dragon comes down, call it out, evade that lane, and then move back into that lane in order to dodge the remaining dragons that are sweeping across the area.
Exactly. So we've seen Skyline D actually dropped really low every time of this AoE. I feel like they don't run any defensive legendaries or any defensive gear, and they're just winging it.
I'm sure well, I don't know if they're winging it.
Well,
you know, they've probably practiced this dungeon a lot, and you know, they said, hey, you know what, we can survive with a minimal amount of health every time. So they're probably kind of calculated ahead of time what is the most offensive setup we can run with without risking death from that horn, as long as we rely on our healer to heal us to full every time. SunSky doing well again, wants to move once again to move into that first lane from the dragon whirlwinds, of course, parading all over that team. In the meantime, Skyline D dropping quite low again from that horn and preparing to dodge the dragons themselves.
But yeah, as there's no damage coming after the Horn of Valor, it doesn't matter how low you drop as long as you don't die. And they seem to not be dying to it, and they seem to.
And of course, dodge that whirlwinding blade on the side there. Another good view on Skyline D side with those electrical storms going right past them. Both teams at about the same, so actually equal output from both teams. We did have SunSky pull just a bit earlier than Skyline D here, but either way, we do have, I guess, potentially just a bit better single target from Skyline D, but it's really splitting hairs here. Don't say it. Don't say it.
All right, so we see, actually, Skyline D has 3 melee, which is interesting. In this dungeon, I don't think it's actually too bad to have 3 melee. I don't think there's anything that is particularly dangerous for them, except maybe on Hersha, where you have the Arcane Bolt that does jump over to another target if you're too close. So the melee have to be careful to actually spread out for it.
Now, there is a bit of a pain in the butt, of course, with the trash as well. Of course, those Thunder Callers, it will cause the melee to have to kind of move out and sit there by themselves, waiting to be dispelled or waiting for that debuff to run out. Now, this is one of the more dangerous trash pulls in the dungeon, as we were discussing earlier, too. A lot of casters in here, a lot of those champions as well that do that frontal nuke on the tank. And there are, of course, the healers as well. You need to interrupt their heal. They also drop healing runes, which you can move them out of, too. Not the biggest deal in the world, but it is a pain in the butt, especially if you're trying to stun lock these mobs, and if you stun them in one of those healing zones, well, it's kind of quite counterintuitive. Both teams quite well dealing with it, though not as dangerous, of course, because we are in this tyrannical setting.
Yeah, this is actually a dungeon where on live servers people tend to run a Warlock and do some very, very big pulls in this hallway, pull them outside, and with the Warlock, with the ring of the Warlock, the legendary that slows the mobs, the mobs are just getting kited and they don't actually use any abilities as long as the tank that has aggro is out of range 40 yards. But none of those teams have a Warlock, but it is explosive too, so it would be quite risky anyway to do such a big pull.
So the Sentinels here are these mini-boss style mobs, of course. You can't CC them, and they have an aura around them that will prevent CC, crowd control, on any of the surrounding buddies that they have nearby. So we did see that they pulled along with a champion and one of the mystics, the healer, of course, meaning you can't really interrupt that healer or CC it. You can only silence it, but they do kill it fast enough while the Sentinel is still alive. And of course, at 30%, the Sentinel will gain that absorb shield, which in this case can be actually offensively dispelled or spell stolen.
Yeah, it's actually a pain to pull those Sentinels, as they have quite a lot of HP and they do make everyone immune around them, so they can't pull the whole hallway. And, well, you can interrupt it, as you said, with silences, also knockbacks work, but they seem to be dealing quite well with them.
Yep, so they do destroy. There's one that kind of patrols the path now. The two that you see in the gate in front of you as the camera pans over to the left, they do have to deal with those at the same time later on. Here's one of those big pulls you were just discussing earlier. They do well to kind of pull everything and then kind of go around the corner, make sure that none of those explosives are going off and within their line of sight. Good grip, kind of barely just out of that healing rune. Hopefully some of the mobs, most of the mobs are out of that. They do have one of the explosives go off, but they do well group up the mobs and are able to cleave down the mob, the trash, as well as handle the explosive that they're spawning in the meantime.
Now, one more ability, as you mentioned earlier, is this stun and debuff that gets applied to you and it stuns you after a couple of seconds. Now, it is volcanic, so you might get a little bit unlucky if you do a big pull and you get stunned and then a couple of explosives, a couple of volcanic spawn underneath your character.
Right, you are, but none of them are having that issue at the moment. Really clean run on both sides right now, but I mean, SunSky really kind of just pulling ahead right now. We are finally seeing that big pull from Skyline D in the meantime. They opted not to a line of sight around the corner rather than kind of just pull everything in the halls we're seeing on the left side and grip it together. In the meantime, SunSky moving up towards Hersha, finishing some of the last of the trash. These Shield Maidens particularly devastating for the tank, as not only do they do a Mortal Strike debuff, increasingly preventing healing done on the tank, but also an armor debuff, and the combination of them just crushes tanks, which is why you see the tank opting to kind of kite the Shield Maidens around and away.
Yes, also interesting to see that they pull the mobs backwards, because, I mean, they have to walk back after they kill them, so it's a little bit time inefficient, but maybe they need to cut it anyway, because as you said, they do a frontal cleave and it hurts the tank quite a bit.
But no, you're absolutely right. It would have been better to kind of U-turn around, you know, curve back up, because now look at all this ground that they have to cover on the way back. Those are some precious seconds lost right there, unless they're not planning on doing Hersha first, which might be interesting, and it looks like that's exactly what they're doing. They're actually turning around and going to Fenrir first, so the dungeon does split in terms of optional bosses after the first boss. They can deal with, of course, Fenrir by going to the right, which is the dog boss, or Hersha, which is the Valor boss on the left, which we're seeing Skyline D work towards, but they might kind of turn around as well. One more big pull coming here from SunSky once again.
That's a very, very big pull they're doing here. Let's see if they can pull this off. Let's see, keep an eye on the explosives. There's also a healing rune that the mobs are actually stunned in.
Yeah, see, that's what we were talking about earlier. You got to be careful with those stuns, and if you do stun them, make sure that you're interrupting that Mystic if for some reason the stun was missed on them. In the meantime, Skyline D here dealing with the rest of these Shield Maidens. Tank dipping quite low. We do see some of those unit debuffs on them as well for the armor and, of course, the Mortal Strike. Looks like they will be dealing with Hersha first. Now, I do not, at this point, they definitely will not have that Bloodlust or Heroism available to them. We can see their debuff still on their character screens. It's going to be a bit before it comes up, and they still only have these 2 mini bosses to deal with prior to Hersha.
Yeah, I wonder why they choose to do Hersha first. As you said, there's no Bloodlust, and they have less battle rests too. If you would go and do the other boss, Fenrir, first, then you have more battle rests and you have more Bloodlust, as Hersha is the most difficult boss in this dungeon for sure. Indeed,
yeah. I mean, she's one of the ones that has some of those one-shot mechanics, frequent swaps, lots of magic damage coming in, so we'll have to keep an eye. Now, some of the trash abilities that you see here are representative of the ones that Hersha will have, as she does absorb their powers once they get defeated by the players, doing well to destroy that explosive orb on the side there in a moment, while the Thunderstorm players need to get in that bubble to reduce the amount of nature damage coming in from this heavy nature's damage from the Thunderstorm. Now, SunSky has actually once again returned back to Hersha's side. I think they were just trying to buy some time for their Bloodlust debuffs to wear off so that they can use it on Hersha. So smart move by them, but they did waste a bit of time with travel.
Yeah, it was actually pretty smart. As you can see, the enemy forces right now, SunSky is on 80%, while Skyline D is only in 63%, so they're pretty far ahead in trash here.
We do have to keep in mind as well that there are some mandatory mobs that they need to kill. The door upstairs towards the final two bosses, Skovald and why am I forgetting his name? We killed him a million times. Odin, thank you. The door to him will not open until you kill those two sentinels, and of course upstairs we have the 4 kings as well, which add up to just under 16% worth of trash. So SunSky only needs about 4 to 5% more trash before. Actually, they don't need anything else if you think about it, because they need to kill those two sentinels unless they pulled those already. Nonetheless, they need minimal trash before dealing with the 4 kings upstairs. So we'll have to see what they skip in Fenrir's open door area.
Okay, so I'm actually really excited to see this boss because this boss is very difficult. Untyrannical, we are in a tournament realm here, so all the gear scaled to 970. They don't have any avoidance as it is disabled, which a lot of guilds, a lot of groups are using on live servers to mitigate some of the damage that this boss is putting out. And you can get comboed really badly by this boss. You can get direct abilities on you, and if you get 2 in a row, it's a lot of damage.
Yep, so here we are indeed, Skyline D pulling Hersha now. Now Hersha kind of has 2 transitional, not really phases, but you do want to bounce her from either side of the room. As you can see, these ghostly members that were left over from the trash will empower her for a certain damage type the longer she stays on one side. In this case, the nature damage, you can see it just absolutely chunking the group down. After this, she will cast one of those arcane bolts, dealing a big chunk of damage to the player. Luckily, it's on the Druid. Does well there to go into bear form. She will then do a huge shield frontal attack on the tank, punting them in the, in the whatever direction the tank wants to point her in. Usually, obviously, in the direction of the other mob, which is now empowering her with the holy damage buff. In the meantime, though, as a result of not being empowered by the nature damage, she's losing stacks of that.
Yeah, we actually saw both the rogues have cheat death cooldown, so this is going to be very difficult to survive for them. Rogues are pretty tanky. They do have feint, and they do have cloak to survive abilities, so they have to make sure that they time their cooldowns correctly to not die here.
So we do see one of the explosive orbs go off on Skyline D on the left. The tank takes a really big hit with that frontal shield after. Shouldn't be too hard for a DK to manage. They are able to AMS every other one, and of course should likely have Vamp blood up for every single punt as well, amongst having any backup ones such as IBF as well with that 3-minute CD. Both the teams once again back on the nature damage side. Hersha, of course, a bit lower on Skyline D side, but I mean the trash differential is pretty big between the two teams right now.
Yeah, we've seen the Eye of Storm here on Skyline D side. We saw the Druid actually using Incarnation, which is not very common for Druids to use, but this Druid here in Skyline D's lineup uses Incarnation almost every dungeon here in the MDI, probably because you do a lot of big pulls.
We do see a death going over on the healer for SunSky. They immediately use that battle res, get him up right away. I mean, this is not an encounter you can do without a healer, yes. As Adrian alluded to earlier. So back they go over to the holy side. They still have a while to go. I mean, the Hersha just passing that 50% mark right now for SunSky. Now, it is important to note that if the melee are concentrating and skilled enough, they will actually be able to still be within melee range of Hersha and damage her during this kind of holy orb expulsion that she's doing right now.
Also gotta be careful with those expel light. You can see the circles around the players as it overlaps with the Eye of Storm, as we can see here on Skyline D side. So you gotta be careful that you're still inside the circle, but you don't blow up any of your team members. Yeah,
that would be very unfortunate indeed. We're starting with a thunderstorm on SunSky's side. In the meantime, Skyline D finishing up with their storm, taking that Arcane lightning bolt. No damage done by it. Tank gets punted across. We see that AMS come up from the Blood DK, not taking too much damage as it absorbs a huge chunk of that holy frontal. Hersha down to 10% now on Skyline D side. They will just have to deal with this last phase of the expulsion, and they should be able to get out of here after. No more thunderstorm for them. SunSky, though, might, depending on how quickly they deal with this execute range, which they don't really have much advantage to take. Oh my god, the healer goes down again for SunSky. They'll likely have to use the second battle res on that healer right now. Yeah,
still 17% without the healer. As you said, it's very, very difficult to deal with this, so they had to use 2 battle reses for this boss. But as we said earlier, it is a very difficult boss, and Disc Freeze might not be the best choice for this boss, so...
Yeah, Jack, you hear that? So Hersha once again going back over to the nature side. So they're definitely, even despite the 2 deaths on the healer, they're taking a fair bit longer to kill Hersha than did Skyline D. Skyline D now getting right back on the trash that's already been cleared for SunSky that they're about to pull right now. Looks like they're kind of stealthing through, at least the Druid is. Yeah, so they're doing a big pull here in just a moment. We see that Sky Step come up from the Blood DK, expecting an AoE grip to the middle there in just a moment, and some big damage coming up from those melee.
Yeah, so actually doing the exact same pull as SunSky did earlier, where they pulled the whole right side, which is a very, very big pull to do. And you need to coordinate your stance and your interrupts properly, and make sure you kill all the explosives.
Yeah, so we see the Druid doing well there to Typhoon and help the DK kite along. making sure they drop the D&D with that 70% slow right in front of that trash. Everything melts, no problem for them. SunSky right back on their tail. This trash is already cleared as Skyline D is cleaning up that last mob, and they will all head over into the portal towards Fenrir's domain.
Now they're actually neck on neck. We can see both of them are entering Fenrir's room. They both have 80% trash. The only difference is 2 deaths on SunSky's side, while Skyline D has no deaths at all.
Indeed. So here they're going to have to skip a fair bit. They're both at 80% right now. And we do see teams typically kind of go up the side to the right. Some teams go over through these kind of yaks in the middle, and, you know, they can imprison them. Either Tim can imprison them. But Fenrir has, of course, 2 phases. Nagura, why don't you tell us about that?
Okay, so Fenrir has one ability that everyone needs to care about, which is where he jumps around. He targets... he targets different amount of players. First he starts with 3, and then he increases the number of players that he targets. He jumps to people, and oh, they actually pulled the trash with the boss. Wow, that's very risky.
Presumably intentionally.
Yeah, probably.
But as you were saying, yes, about Fenrir.
So he jumps around, and if you get hit by his jump, then it actually gets a debuff applied to the player. It's a bleed that does ticking damage, and it stacks up. If you stand in its way while he jumps around, then you might get hit by another player's charge. You can dodge it, though, with abilities like Blink, Disengage, or just running very fast.
So, of course, we do know that Fenrir at 60% will run away to his cave to lick his wounds, and players will need to kind of chase him down and restart the encounter. He is doing his best here to make sure that he's vanquishing the foes and protecting Odin, but sometimes we just have to throw him a bone and go along with it. Now, SunSky with their Fenrir is actually catching up quite well to Skyline D's damage. In a moment, we're going to see Fenrir go immune and run away on both of the screens. Now, there will be one extra new ability when they re-engage Fenrir in his cave with him summoning those dogs.
Yeah, he summons dogs, and he also fixates on one player and chases him for a short amount of duration. Usually we see a Holy Paladin use Bop on that player because obviously you can't get physical damage through Bop, but none of those teams have a Holy Paladin, so they might have to kite it.
Indeed, Fenrir now going to his immune phase as well for SunSky. These guys are neck and neck. I mean, this is really interesting to watch. You know, this might be one of those matches that just comes down to those 2 deaths for SunSky. I mean, this is quite the nail biter. I can see Adrian getting really nervous on the side here between the 2 teams. So these dogs that they're kind of opting to skip are really dangerous, and there's a reason they skip them. This goes right through the middle. They don't need the percent, although I think SunSky might. No, they should be okay too. I don't think either team needs any more trash right now. They'll just deal with the 4 kings once they get upstairs. And once again, they've re-engaged Fenrir. Fenrir will do his shout, and then, as you mentioned earlier, jump around, AoE cleaving the targets that he lands on for that bleed stack.
There's also a cleave that he does around him that actually shares damage. So you want to have the whole group stack up to share the damage on everyone, because if there's only like 1 or 2 players, then it does a lot of damage to those 2 players.
Yep. So you can... Now, the fixate that you mentioned earlier, you can pre-immune it, but there's a lot of teams who opt to try to just CD through it, right? With whether a Sacrifice or an Iron Bark or a Pain Suppression, in this case, on the side of SunSky. Fenrir, 38% of piece here. I mean, these guys are neck in neck. More hounds are summoned. Now, the ads that he summons really aren't too dangerous most of the time, even though they gain that kind of, you know, pack buff between each other. There's not much to deal with, but it is good for cleave, especially for Boomkin, if the tank doesn't pick them up, because they do spawn in a kind of triangle around the outer side of the boss.
Exactly. We can also see 2 rogues in the Skyline D lineup, and obviously they're going to gain a lot of damage from those ads.
Yeah, no, that's really smart play by them. Making sure we do have another death go down on the healer on SunSky's side. Unfortunately, they don't have a battle res for a few more minutes, so they're going to have to 4-man the rest of this encounter. Shouldn't be too hard for the Havoc on the Blad to stay alive, of course, but, you know, the Mage, especially with some of the leap coming up for the bleed, I think they still have the block available for them. We'll have to see, but in just a moment, we're going to get some of those bleed stacks right now.
You can actually see the Mage. So the Mage has if he invises at the right moment, because he always jumps to the furthest target away first. So if the Mage goes far away and he uses invis, then the boss actually cancels its jump, and we can see that none of the players actually have Actually, 1 player has a debuff, but everyone else managed to avoid all the stacks.
The Mage did, in fact, he might have blocked early. He still has that debuff, but it looks like he's been taken for a while. Unfortunately, the Windwalker does get finished off for SunSky. They'll likely, hopefully, be able to pull that kill off. In the meantime, Skyline D now just killing Fenrir just outside of his cave. If you were to go inside that cave, you would see a few subwoofers indeed. Now, Skyline D will finish this off. They're going to run straight to Odin's Gate, right where those 2 Sentinels were earlier. In the meantime, SunSky struggling to finish off Fenrir, 10% left. But, I mean, those bleeds are going to start applying all over the place.
Yes, they're going to have a hard time finishing off this boss with only 2 DPS left alive, and the Demon Hunter is dropping very, very low.
So Skyline D, of course, sapping one of those Yaks on the way out. You do get this speed buff once Herja and Fenrir are done. Doesn't matter which side of the map you end up on. So they get this huge speed buff that will dissipate once they aggro the first king upstairs. Now, Nagura, most teams here try to kind of do that trick where they grab that beer mug and try to spawn 2 of those kings at the same time.
Yeah, so if you grab a beer mug here out of the hallway and you use it at the right moment to those 4 kings, then you can actually engage two of them at the same time and kill them at the same time, which saves you quite a lot of time.
Yeah, so I was actually mistaken. You don't need to kill those 2 sentinels to open the gate. I'm getting old, guys. I'm sorry, man. I can't keep up with all these changes all the time. Nonetheless, they do skip those 2 sentinels. As you saw, Skyline D's just stealths right in between them. In the meantime, SunSky has indeed killed Fenrir, so they will too be running over, but they have that 20-second differential, and they're already trailing behind. I mean, at this point, with how Skyline D's performing, they need to hope that they're going to wipe in order to catch them.
Yeah, it's not impossible for them to wipe to Skovald, as it is a very difficult boss, and they are 3 melee, so if one of the melee gets charged by the boss, it's gonna be, they have to be underfoot to actually dodge the charge, because if it hits all of them, they might actually just die to it.
Yeah, Skovald is kind of a Herja style, one of those scary bosses with that one-shot, but that is the only thing he can one-shot with. Now, range can dodge it, a bit harder for, but you know, rogues have their feint. Havoc Demon Hunter can just get the hell away. Fell rush away if it targets them. And of course, the Druid can go in bear form. The tank doesn't have to really worry about it. So I think they're pretty safe with their comp coming up to Skovald. SunSky, though, that Disc Priest is pretty vulnerable for that.
Yeah, they don't have a Warlock to abuse like a gateway or something, so the Disc Priest, I'm not sure how exactly he's going to dodge it, if he has a certain class that has like a Goblin or something, or that he can jump the charge, or if he just shields himself to survive the damage. It depends on how much it does in 23 tyrannical.
A shield might be enough. Now, you are noticing that the players are pulling the kings in a specific order. The way these kings work is each one of them has a particular ability or buff that they do. Once you kill that particular king, he will buff all remaining kings with that buff, meaning that the last 2 that you have to pull together at the same time will have the previous 2 kings buffs, and of course absorb each other's buffs once you kill one of them, which we're about to see here from Skyline D.
Now, one ability you have to be a little bit careful about on these mobs is the dagger that they throw on random people, as we saw just on the Rogue. He dropped pretty low, but it is tyrannical, so they're not actually doing more damage. You would have to be a little bit more careful if it would be 45.
And you have to be careful with these Ancestors as well. Of course, they do some of these Ancestors, and if they are allowed to absorb the Ancestors nearby, they will heal for 10% HP, if I'm not mistaken. We do see that huge dagger hit on one of the Rogues come in. Luckily, does not one-shot them. But, I mean, these Kings hit pretty hard regardless. I mean, that it's not fortified with the 23. So you have to make sure you're constantly kiting away from these Ancestors. There's a Sever debuff that goes up on the tank. Another big hit on one of the Rogues. As long as it doesn't get 2 of them at the same time, I think they'll be okay. But they still both have their cheat deaths, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, they also have Bloodlust ready for Skovald. We see both teams are going to use that Bloodlust. And yeah, the Skyline D still 0 deaths, so they have 3 battle rests, so they're pretty safe at this point.
Right, you are. So they're finishing up the last king, King Haldor, here in a moment, after which they'll have to succumb to the RP of Skovald, the champion, running into Odin's room, claiming that he deserves the shield. It has been ages since we've seen this kind of thing happen, since we haven't seen Halls at all during this tournament in the first place. SunSky now just dealing with one of their last kings as well.
Yeah, so we see SunSky is actually not that far behind. Maybe if they do a little bit more damage, or yes, there's deaths. But yeah, if Skyline D does this perfect run and does the next 2 bosses as clean as they have done the start of the dungeon, then they will probably come up ahead.
Now Skyline, well, Skyline D is about to pull the boss here now. Nagura, walk us through the boss in a second, and keep in mind, of course, that there is a kind of trick we could do with the shield. It's really important to pop that shield at the last second for his huge AoE.
Yeah, so the tank is a shield that he can use that pretty much absorbs damage to all people who stand inside or behind of the shield. Now, the boss Skovald does an AoE where the tank has to use the shield. As you said, the tank should use the shield a little bit later, because after the AoE, he does one more ability, either the Savage Blade or the Fellblaze Charge, and you can dodge that ability too with the shield if he just uses that a little bit later. So
we do see the Druid does well there to go into bear form. We'll see this Ragnarok in just a moment. No, it is not the movie that you guys were thinking of. Everybody hides behind the shield here, and right after this, as you alluded to, he will do one of his 2 abilities. RNG here will either be the Savage Blade or another charge. Savage Blade, of course, is an AM active mitigation check on the tank. Will hit you for a bunch of damage if you fail to have the active mitigation up. As it hits you, it will also apply a bleed that stacks. Afterwards, of course, Skovald does knock the Aegis out of your hand and use uses it to his own demise, spawning 3 fire elementals that players do well. As you can see, everybody kind of grouped up under the boss there to make sure that they spawn those fire elementals under the boss and are able to quickly cleave them down.
Now, after you spawn those elementals in melee range, so they're easier to cleave down, it's important for ranged DPS players to walk away from the boss as far as possible. So in case they get the Fellblaze charge on them, they're able to dodge it.
Right, you are. Skovald down to 58% now for Skyline D, and just being freshly pulled for SunSky right now. There's a lot of health to chew through for this guy. Now, there's no remaining trash. You can see both of the teams are at 100% on your screens right now. Right after this, there will be just a bit of RP left, and they will be able to engage Odin. Odin now, well, we'll talk about it when we get there. One bridge at a time, all right, Nigura? Calm down, Nigura.
So earlier we saw one of the melees actually get targeted by Fellblaze Rush, and we saw 3 of them get hit. And none of them seem to jump that low. They all jump to 30-40% HP. So it seems to, like, even if they don't dodge the charge in melee, they're actually pretty fine. And Skyline D's lineup.
Yeah, I mean, I think at this point they know, of course they have their timers, they know when one of the special abilities are coming up, and the rogues can just pre-feint, mitigating a huge percentage of that AoE damage that would otherwise hit them. So there's a chance that perhaps without that feint, it could, you know, proc that cheat death, but no problem for them in the meantime. Like we said, you'll have to keep your eye really on SunSky's side. You know, that Windwalker, perhaps a bit more vulnerable, and certainly the Disc Priest as well, can't take a huge chunk of damage. We see that Havoc Demon Hunter dropping to 28% health there from that Fellblaze charge.
We can also see the difference in healer DPS, actually. Oh, we saw one cheat death proc on Skyline D's side here. But yeah, as I said, the healer DPS, you can see the Resto Druid doing quite a bit more damage than the Disc Priest, even though I would assume the Resto Druid needs to run Guardian Affinity and can't run Feral Affinity for more damage because of Hersha, as we said earlier, does a lot of damage, and you kind of need the Guardian Affinity there, unless you want to be really risky. But yeah, we can see the Resto Druid doing a little bit more damage than the Disc Priest here.
If they have time, especially if they have, you know, some RNG, some gaps where the Savage Blade is cast rather than the charge, the tank, you know, active mitigates that properly. Bunch of time to do damage. Here we see that Solar Wrath being cast by that Resto Druid as they bait those elementals back into Skovald. Skovald now about to drop on Skyline D side. I mean, Skyline D, another cheat death proc. We just mentioned how there's no problem without the cheat death procs, but they missed some of those feints, and we do have both rogues with their cheat death down. Now, on Odin, of course, you don't actually die if you were to reach 0% health. One of those Valor Jar actually grab you and fly you up to a balcony. If I'm not mistaken, as a result, like, cheat death mechanics don't really work on that encounter, because I believe when you die, I don't remember which one happens first. I'm not sure if either the Valor Jar grabs you first or the cheat death mechanic would work first. Nonetheless, they don't have it available for Odin. We do have Skovald go down for Skyline D. Now Odin will jump down to them, talk for just a bit, and they will engage him. And what I wanted to mention earlier is similar to Hersha that we see in Maw of Souls, you don't actually have to get Odin's health to 0. He will start at 100, and he dies at, or stops at around 80.5.
Exactly. So we see 2 rogues here and 1 druid who can use Sinidaria as legendary belt, which increases your damage by 100%, I believe, until the boss is at 90%.
Yeah, a lot.
I'm not sure if it's 100%, but it's a lot of damage increase. I actually used a dot on them, I remember now. It also heals you for quite a bit. So as it is pretty much 50%. Yeah, all 3 of them. Oh yeah, 4 of them. Actually, Demon Hunter can use it as well. So I think they're actually gonna have a lot of damage on this boss.
I mean, just look at those numbers.
Yeah, look at the numbers. And then they also get the buff later on from if they walk on the correct rune.
Yeah, so of course nothing the Mage can really take advantage of for SunSky, who are now also waiting for Odin to drop down. Odin already down to 94% health. After this big AoE that players need to move away from, he will periodically keep summoning spears and 1 at a time. This Obliterator, which needs to be interrupted. Every successful cast that he does will increase his cast speed for the next cast, dealing increasing damage to the raid and causing a potential wipe. Now, Odin will as well color and mark players with runes, as you see above their head, and they're responsible for then matching the rune and color of their assignment to the floor marks on the ground, after which they'll enter this Valor Jar state for 30 seconds, the Valkyrie state, and they do 50% increased damage and healing during it.
Yeah, we can see just how much damage they're doing here. Odin is already to 88% HP. They only have 8% HP left, while SunSky is still at 89% there, so they're quite far behind, and it's going to be very difficult here for Skyline D to make a mistake, as they had a flawless run already.
Yeah, I mean, this looks like it's Skyline D's to take in just a moment. Now we're having that second AoE from Odin come up. 6% left, about 5 and a bit percent left. I mean, there's just no way they don't complete this at the moment. They're playing flawlessly. 0 deaths on the board from them. They've really practiced this dungeon well. SunSky really not far behind, though. I mean, if they slip up, SunSky, excuse me, is there to just sweep it from them. Odin at 85% now. We do see a hit from the Rogue. One of the Rogues actually, I believe, was teleported up. No, they're right there. Oh, no, they're right there. What is that? Green. I thought one of them just got ported up.
Runes.
It's the runes, yeah. One of them I thought just got ported up because one of the hits did go off there, but no problem for them in the end, and they're right back into their Valkyrie state, about to finish Odin off.
Yeah, so it's 3% left. I'm pretty sure they got this at this point. Nothing much that can wipe them here. It's the spears that explode that do a little bit of AoE damage, or if a cast would go off from an at. But that's I don't think that's gonna happen to them. And there we go.
And 1-0 in the series for Skyline D. I mean, just flawless play from them.
Yeah, a jolly good show. I think both these teams had a very good performance. Why are you laughing at me?
Jolly good.
Is going to be the choice coming out of the second team, SunSky. They're looking to upset the #1 seed from China, Skyline D, who have just been looking so good. Can they do it on their map choice? Take it away, casters.
Well, here we are again. I'm expecting, of course, I don't even know why we bother saying it anymore, but they will both skip this trash leading up to the first boss. Now, the unfortunate thing here for SunSky is that they have to use Invis-Pots to do it. I believe at least that they will use Invis-Pots to do it in a moment. We do see that that Shackle coming up on that Wisp at the beginning, likely to get a Cephas proc actually, so that they move faster with that Invis-Pots through the trash. Nonetheless, both teams do get that skip all the way to that first boss. Of course, Skyline D will have their pots available though.
Yeah, so it's a slight advantage to have their potion and don't have a 10-minute cooldown going into this fight. I believe both of the teams are going to use Bloodlust, as there's no reason to save it, pretty much.
It's about as a slight of advantage as having an Arcane Mage here in this dungeon right now. And we do see indeed that the Mage over on SunSky has respect into Arcane from Fire in the previous dungeon. Both teams hammering away at Amalgam. Niguro, why don't you walk us through this boss just a bit for those tuning in again?
Okay, so before he goes into the middle and channels his AoE, there's 3 abilities you need to be careful of. One is a tank ability, which
Why, thank you.
which is a frontal cone that you just don't get hit by. And then there's we see one of the abilities here. It's a swirling blade that gets targeted at one player. You just need to get to walk out of it and not get hit by it, else you get knocked away and you get damaged. Then there's another debuff that also gets applied to a random player. It leaves a pool around. You can see it right here in the Druid. If you get hit by it, it explodes after a couple of seconds, and you do get feared, and you take a lot of damage.
And you could get feared into that ever so devastating frontal from the tank ability, which we all know is absolutely horrible. Now, most teams do often opt to, when we do enter this kind of transition phase here in the spirits spawn, most teams try to, you know, shackle, root, do anything to prevent at least one of those spirits from getting to the boss, because the boss does remain in this phase doing essentially nothing, just sitting there channeling until 15%. So you get a lot of free DPS time on that boss. We do see the spirits finally getting in. We see, of course, as I mentioned, that root from Skyline D on the side there. I'm not sure if I saw one from SunSky. We'll see in just a moment. AoE grip coming in from both blood DKs so that they can cleave efficiently those adds on top of the boss.
Exactly. So if one of those spirits does reach the boss for whatever reason, if you don't have enough damage or you didn't slow or CC it enough, then the boss gets a debuff that increases its damage done by 100%, and that will make the AoE that happens at 15% or when all the spirits die, it's devastating.
Yeah, so we do see on SunSky's side the blood DK constantly running out, applying D&D to the last spirit, running out, single target, ripping it away, and then running back in to do some damage on the Amalgam. Now, damage here in favor of Skyline D. They're ahead by about 5% right now. No surprise there with that huge rogue damage coming up. In the meantime, SunSky just reaching that 20% mark. Amalgam for Skyline D now as well exploding.
Yeah, so we can compare the damage a little bit here. We see the Disc Priest actually did more damage than the rest of it so far. Everything else seems quite even. SunSky is a couple of percentage behind, but the damage is pretty even between those two.
Damage between the tanks just slightly off too, but you know, nothing huge. About 5% differential, and that's what it'll remain between the two teams as Skyline D now waits for that RP before the door opens, leading them up the Rook, I suppose, of Blackrock Hold, where the spiders are leading up to, of course, that really nasty trash, but where the fun begins with the Arcane Mage leading up to the second boss.
Yeah, so we have Bursting and Grievous, which are two pretty healing intensive affixes, but we saw earlier that most teams don't really care about those affixes and do some very big pulls anyway. Like, so we're gonna see how they're gonna do here.
Yeah, I mean, these were the standard 3 affixes chosen by Blizzard on the forced maps earlier for Blackrock Hold, and the wild card affix here, Bursting, was actually chosen as Bursting by SunSky. So we've seen both of these teams play this map, and we know that they can handle these big pulls with all those Bursting stacks going on. Of course, Skyline D having a huge favor there, right, because of the pre-immunes that we have, the survivability of the Havoc, etc., and you know, just the veining damage for the rogues as well.
We also see the Skyline D Blood Decay used the Disguise Potion. Oh, he drops really low actually, procs the Purgatory here, but they managed to survive. And we see the other group a slight disadvantage because Blood Decay had to use that Invis Potion, does not have Disguise that Potion to pull the trash together faster.
So the spinner being pulled up to the top of the stairs by Skyline D right now, where they likely will pull, I assume they will kind of pull that patrol of the, yeah, there it is, right, the champion and the scout. Now, Nagura, there's a lot, as we always mention with this dungeon, a lot of dangerous trash coming up here. Not just dangerous because the tank's taking a ton of damage, but dangerous because there's a huge amount of residual and splash damage on the group. We have the scout, of course, with that knife dance. We have the archers shooting random arrows all over the place. We have the frontal for the champion that needs to get interrupted. Otherwise, we have that rallying cry buff on all the mobs in the area. So lots of hard CC needed on these mobs, not kickable damage. Not kickable cast, rather.
Yeah, and, as I mentioned earlier already, that you can actually outrange most of the abilities. But as we have so many melees here, and the Arcane Mage also wants to be in melee range, they have to be very, very good at interrupting those abilities. Else, some people might just die. We also see here that one of the Arcanists got enslaved by the DK, and it's going to be buffing up the Mage later on.
Yeah, so they're clearing up the rest of this pack, after which I assume they'll do what we saw them do the other day, which is pull the entirety of this hall and just have everything get absolutely annihilated by the Arcane Mage. So I'm hoping they pull it off again, because it really is a treat to see. It's a lot of fun just seeing that amount of damage come up. Skyline, in the meantime, doing a pretty substantially large pull as well, pulling the entire hall, AoE gripping it down. Now, we did see them do this on their clears as well, getting in as much stun and damage as they can right now, and then we're going to see the DK start kiting them away.
Yeah, this is actually a very, very, very big pull. It is super, super risky. We see the Druid here in his incarnation form, trying to heal up all the people. It's also going to be interesting to see how they survive the bursting stacks afterwards. And they have to manage the bursting stacks properly, because if they get a lot of stacks and then they refresh the stack at the very last second, it's going to be very, very hard to out-heal.
We've actually seen Skyline D on a fair bit of bursting maps, and they're very, very good at making sure that they don't do exactly what we just said, which is refreshing those bursting stacks before they fall off. Druid chunking down there from those bursting stacks right now. Make sure they go around the corner in order to LOS Shamalama Ding Dong that just comes down right now, and getting ready to DPS them over there in the corner. So once they kill that pack, the door's already open for them. In the meantime, SunSky starting to lag behind. We've been hyping out this kind of arcane damage play, and we just haven't really seen it perform just yet, but I do suspect that a lot of the advantage that they will gain from it will be, of course, that single target boss damage.
Yeah, and the downside about controlling this Arcanist and buffing up the Mage is the downtime that you have while the Mage is buffing himself up, eating up, getting the mana back, spell sealing the buff again. It takes quite a while until he buffed up, and we can see Skyline D doing so many very, very big pulls that they might just make up for the damage that the buff gives them by just time.
Right, you are. So right now, I think they're finally rearing up to make some of those bigger pulls. SunSky getting ready with that Arcane Mage in just a moment. Skyline D, in the meantime, finishing off the rest of this pack, doing well to have some of those single target grips, using SCC, interrupting some of those uninterruptible casts that we see the two knife dances go off, immediately gripped and interrupted right there. Well done by them. And after they do kill this, now, we do have the commander at a fairly high amount of health right now. It seems they didn't really focus him very well, or they decided not to focus in to get rid of some of that residual damage in the group. But now he just melts immediately down.
Yeah, they're actually quite far ahead now, as you can see. SunSky is still buffing up the Mage, getting ready for the big pull, while Skyline D is already done with the whole hallway. They just need to kill the last 3 trash mobs, and then they're at the boss.
Hold on to your seats right now, because we're about to see that Arcane Mage rocket up in damage, destroying that hallway. 45, 47 million health damage done to the group. They're waiting for a Shamalama Ding Dong to drop down. There they go, and no sooner do you see them drop down that they're just going to absolutely melt in a moment. The Arcane Mage, of course, maintaining the stacks, constantly spell stealing in the meantime. We see him doing an absolute ton of damage to those mobs coming down as well.
Okay, so Skyline D is finishing off those last 3 mobs, and then they're onto the boss. Now, SunSky actually might manage to catch up at this point, because the Mage did delete that trash bag.
But oddly enough, we did see them do this trick already with the Arcane Mage in one of their first series, and this pack actually died way faster the first time they did it. So it seems that they didn't actually execute their Arcane Mage strategy here as well as the first time. We do see some spell seals coming off now. They're getting some more damage in. The Windwalker dropping very low there, but I mean, they're just behind at this point. We still have 0 deaths on the board for both teams, but Skyline D just finishing up that last trash pack before, of course, going over to Ilisana, Nagura.
Yeah, they actually don't have their Bloodlust ready yet for Ilisana. As we saw earlier, Ilisana is a quite difficult boss, especially with those affixes and Tyrannical. We saw the no healer group and not even being able to kill the boss at all. So we'll see how they're going to do without Bloodlust here.
do without Bloodlust, and Ilisana is really where Ilisana, and of course Smash Spite once we get to him, the third boss, is really where SunSky is going to have the opportunity, assuming they don't mess anything up on the trash in the meantime, to really gain a lot of ground on Skyline D because of that huge burst damage that's going to come out of that Mage with that Arcanist buff. In the meantime, of course, with Ilisana, we have to watch out for that Fell Rush. As you mentioned before, the Vengeful Shear on the tank, want to make sure you have that active mitigation up. But really, one of the most punishing mechanics on this is that Brutal Glaive that constantly goes out on the players.
Yeah, I saw the Druid go bear form every time the glaive gets thrown to him. He's the only ranged in this group, so he's the only guaranteed target that is going to get hit by this glaive. It is dodgeable, it does physical damage, so Druid has 20% dodge in bear form. Unfortunately, he didn't dodge any of the glaives yet, so he's a little bit unlucky, but as he is a healer and he has bear form and frenzied regeneration, he should be fine.
Right, you are. Now, Ilisana down to 50% already. I mean, they're dishing a huge amount of damage. And once again, another boss that really plays into the strength of those rogues in this group. You get those 2 extra mobs that spawn the Arcanist, and of course that melee mob there with the Vanguard as well, that they're able to just constantly Shuriken Storm and get a lot of extra single target damage on Ilisana. I mean, as much as, once again, we're hyping up this Arcane Mage doing a ton of damage, I mean, Skyline D is just, you know, performing really well as well.
Yeah, they're doing an insane amount of damage. Both Rogues and the Demon Hunter, they're doing really crazy damage. Even the Blood Decay is doing quite a lot of damage. Now we see SunSky needs to wait again, as I said, the downtime of actually buffing up the Mage. It takes quite a long time until you have enough buffs and until it's actually worth it.
Yeah, but I mean, all aboard the Arcane train in just a moment. We'll have to see just exactly what you will peak at for that single target damage. It's just really fun to watch. I love seeing the boss's health just chunk down 5-6% at a time. Skyline D, though, just about to finish Ilisana, 16%. Now, we do know that once Ilisana falls, this will be a new checkpoint of the dungeon. All eyes on SunSky as it goes to the bigger screen right now. Arcane Mage is about to do some immense damage coming up in just a moment, but not peaking out. Okay, never mind. I stand corrected. So there it goes. So Ilisana's health just chunking down right now, 65%. He does do that pre-block in order to not get that Brutal Glaive. We do have a death, unfortunately, though, from the Windwalker. Goes down with that Fell Rush. Ilisana already down to 43% health from that Arcane Mage with that ridiculous damage, now evocating to gain that mana pool back.
Okay, so no one important that as long as the Mage is alive. But yeah, the boss drop's very, very low. They also had Bloodlust ready because they were slower at the trash. They actually used their Bloodlust at the pull of this boss. Now the other group has their Bloodlust still ready, so I'm not sure if they're going to use it for a big trash pull or if they're actually going to save it for the next boss.
Yeah, of course, we are expecting that Skyline D will pull that entire haul with those Blade Lords. We have to keep an eye on that in just a moment. But SunSky, I mean, okay, well, Ilisana's down at 10% HP, 12% HP, about to fall here in a moment. Obviously, as I mentioned, they did gain definitely a lot of time on Skyline D here. I mean, Ilisana is still in transition phase and she's about to die. Skyline D had to deal with a substantial amount of phase 1. We do see the big pull from Skyline D, as I alluded to earlier. Yeah, so the tank is going to grip everything together and then start kiting away, so they're going to require a lot of AoE damage here.
Yeah, they pulled the whole hallway with the extra room. It's an insane amount of mobs here, especially with bursting and grievous. They have to be very, very careful here to not get too many stacks or not to refresh. But we see the debuff drop off here for a second and get applied immediately, so they're doing a very, very good job at dealing with bursting here.
Yeah, and it is worth mentioning actually that one of the rogues is Assassination and actually one is sub, so the Shuriken Storm that we mentioned earlier actually did only apply to one of the rogues. Does well to heal up the rest of the group, the Resto Druid for Skyline D, and they move on relatively unscathed. Not a single death from them. They'll be moving up to that Indiana Jones stairwell in just a moment, dodging those boulders. SunSky now rearing up to do pretty much the exact same pull, and we're going to see in a moment.
Yeah, very, very clean run and super big pulls coming out of Skyline D here. We see the Mage got buffed up and now they're doing the same pull, but as we said, the downtime by the Mage getting buffed up, it just takes a lot of time, and while Skyline D doesn't have to wait for anything, just goes in and pulls everything.
But you know, at this point where, well, okay, Arcane Mage going up, Havoc Demon Hunter going up, at this point, you know, we are seeing that SunSky has definitely caught up a bit of ground on Skyline D. They have had 2 deaths, so let's keep that in mind, and one of their battle reses will be unavailable as a result. They do well in this hallway. Another death going down, unfortunately, though, for the Mage right now, too. So that's going to be 3 deaths, and the Mage just released, having to run all the way back upstairs now as well. So the advantage that I was, oh, and the tank goes down, too. This is
bad for them because the Arcanist is not going to be enslaved anymore, so they might just wipe here because he has so many buffs and he's just going to kill people.
Yeah,
here
he almost just one-shot the Priest right there. The Priest trying to do their best. Does a good job to shackle. Yeah, good job to shackle and run away immediately to make sure that these mobs don't reset. They're just so close to dying. It would be an absolute shame if they reset and gain all their health back.
Okay, so Skyline D, we had a Purgatory proc here. They did a very big pull up the gauntlet here. They pulled a lot of Dominators together. As we mentioned earlier today, that they didn't pull it all the way up to the boss room, so they can keep the Fel Paps later and pull them to the boss for the Rogue's damage.
So we're up to 8 deaths now for SunSky. I mean, that's going to spell certain doom for them if Skyline D continue to perform in this completely flawless manner that they are. Not a single death. I mean, we kind of just had a death with the Purg, but not really. They move over into Smash Spite's room right now. Once again, doing the trick they did earlier to maintain. You see a lot of those bats on the tank, wanting to bring them along with the boss so that you can feed some more of that single target damage for that sub-rogue.
Yeah, we're going to see the sub-rogue do crazy damage here in the opener with all those pups. We see SunSky actually has another death, and we see the rogue doing 7 million DPS almost on this opener here.
It's like he's an Arcane Mage or something. Now, we do see SunSky running up that kind of boulder stairwell right now. Very bold of them, I might ask. They are going up the stairwell, getting ready as well to do pretty much the same kind of gauntlet pull that we've seen. Actually, you know what? I think all of the Chinese... almost all of the Chinese teams do, which is where they kind of pull all 6 of the Dominators together in that hallway, not in the boss's room first. Smash Spite already down to 66% for Skyline D. After this, of course, they'll only have to deal with that hallway. A lot of damage coming in from that AoE stomp, but you know what? Similar to what we saw that Horn of Valor do on Himdall in the first dungeon, they've probably practice this so much that they know that they're like, look guys, don't worry, we're gonna dip to like 10% health, but we're not actually gonna die as long as we're topped off, so it's no problem.
Yeah, they're very well prepared. They probably calculated exactly how many defensive items or legendaries or talents they need to use for all of those AoEs coming out of those tyrannical dungeons.
Now, yeah, I mean, dipping low again, no problem. The Druid gets right out of that bear form, making sure he heals everyone up before the Grievous gets too out of hand. Reaching about 4 stacks for each of the Rogues. As soon as they hit that 90% threshold, though, they are good to go. Everybody gets out of that Grievous stack. Smash Spite now at 43%. And we are seeing SunSky now just reach Smash Spite here. Again, another opportunity for them here to make up a lot of ground with that single target damage. But you know what? After this, that's pretty much all that they can really make up with this Arcanist, because the Arcanist, I mean, they'll make up a bit, I guess, at the start of the 4th boss too, but they really got to make up a lot of time, not to mention an extra 40 seconds because of that death
Exactly.
counter.
Now, another thing that this boss does, Smash Spite, is a charge where he targets a random player and charges to that player. Now, the charge can be intercepted if another player goes in between the boss and the player. It does a lot of damage, and it applies a debuff that increases the damage taken by the next charge. Now, we see here from Skyline that not actually the tank is taking the charges, but most of the charges are actually getting soaked by the Demon Hunter.
Weird. I mean, I guess Blur, Netherrock, whatever it may be, no problem there. I mean, to be fair, a second stack isn't really that painful. You can usually take it. Like, not only the tank is the one that could take it, but I mean, whatever works for them, no problem. Smash Spite now at 8% for Skyline D, getting ready to finish up and go up the remaining Rook of Blackrock Hold in just a moment. SunSky now, of course, Team Arcane Mage over there, getting Smash Spite down to 42%, or 43%, excuse me, already, with about 25 million burst damage from that Arcane Mage, using the strength of that buff from the Arcanist that they have held onto the side. So they did certainly make up a lot of time here to catch up, but at this point, Nagura, they're not winning if Skyline D doesn't wipe, period.
Yes, I don't think they can make up a lot of time at the last boss, because using the cooldowns on the pull is not even that beneficial, because later on, you get this buff that increases your damage done. So in theory, usually people save their cooldowns and use it later on. So you don't actually save that much time on the last boss for doing this trick with the Arcanist.
Yeah, certainly they gained a huge amount of time with Smash Spite, but it just seems like a little too late, unfortunately. Smash Spite will be falling soon here for our SunSky. Still very fun to see that kind of that mage trick there with them. Skyline D, in the meantime, working their way up to the 4th boss. Typical pull here is pulling that entire kind of stairwell together and then AoEing it down rapidly as they're doing here. Druid dipping quite low, but no problem for them. Heals himself back up before that final tick of bursting / Grievous would have killed him.
Yeah, so we see SunSky probably doing the exact same pull there. I'm not sure if they're going to buff up the Mage, but I feel like they're running out of time. Maybe they should just go for it, and hopefully they do a lot of damage even without the Mage buff.
I mean, we do know the Mage is going to buff one more time before they pull Kurtalos here, the first part of this fight. But Nagura, the last boss of this dungeon, now we do see that Skyline D is at 99%. I do believe that they have something MC'd. They did control Undead on one of the two mobs types from the holiday that just dealt with either the Lancer or the Swordsman. Yeah, okay, so they do have a Lancer, so that will be the last 100% that they need. But we do know that this fight is in 2 phases, if you want to tell us about that.
Yeah, so in the first phase, is nothing too much you need to care about except this one Whirling Blade that we see there on the right-hand side and this middle beam that you need to dodge. Now, the Whirling Blade gets targeted on a random player. You just need to make sure that you don't put it through the middle of the room, as it persists for quite a while. And then once this Ravencrest dies, you actually have the actual boss here in the middle that does a couple of abilities that you need to care about. As we talked about earlier, it applies a buff to the whole group that increases your damage done, your healing done, and your HP. Now, the very first Shadow Bolt, which is a Shadow Bolt that hits everyone in the group, you don't actually have the buff yet, so you need to make sure that you don't die to it and use your personals. But I don't think Skyline D is going to have a problem with this, as there are 2 Rogues, a Demon Hunter, and the Druid. They have a lot of defenses.
Should be okay, and of course our friend Duntelionax has now spawned. In the meantime, SunSky is once again beefing up their Arcane Mage to make sure that they absolutely delete Kurtalos right away. This one is kind of weird to me. The second, third boss, totally worth it. Kurtalos dies so quickly anyway. Is it really worth spending that 15 seconds, more or less, to get that Arcane Mage buffed? I mean, he's absolutely destroying him, of course, like a Kurtalos' health. But keep in mind, Kurtalos also starts his transition at 20%. You don't even need to get him to 0%. So not really sure if it's worth buffing the Arcane Mage on this last fight. I mean, they do melt him. Probably saves a few seconds, but nonetheless, Skyline D now entering their first Dreadlord's Guile phase, where they have to kind of run around aimlessly with their eyes closed, of course, making sure they don't get hit by any of these beams. In the meantime, SunSky now waiting for their transition.
Yeah, it's actually still pretty close. They're not that far behind us, except the 8 deaths, of course, which is 40.
No big deal.
But there's one more ability they need to care about, which is the Swarm that gets applied to one random player. It can also be the tank, which you kind of want to be on the tank because it does a lot of damage to everyone else that isn't a tank. It also stuns you for
which is really annoying.
Very annoying.
Periodic stuns and interrupt spell casting, if I'm not mistaken. So definitely don't want that. Well, you don't want that period, but especially as a caster, it is absolutely detrimental to your sustained damage. Duntelionax now down to 50% on Skyline D side. In the meantime, SunSky just now starting to work on them, got their buffs, and they're dealing with that first Dreadlord's Guile phase.
Yeah, I feel like the problem with SunSky here was I don't think damage-wise they were too far behind, even with their Arcane, even with the downtime of their Arcane Mage spell stealing the buff. But the problem was the almost wipe that they had there in the hallway earlier, where the tank died. They had to re-enslave, they had to run back. I think that actually cost them a lot of time. Not only the time of the death penalty, but also just the walk back and killing the mobs.
I mean, the death time of their life, Duntelionax at 24% on Skyline D. Dealing with what I presume to probably be their last kind of AFK phase here as they run around in circles avoiding those purple beams. In the meantime, SunSky just at 54%. I mean, it's going to take an absolute wipe miracle for Skyline D to lose this. They just do so well. You can tell it's a team that really has put a lot of time practicing. Duntelionax taking a huge amount of damage. They're actually going to kill him ahead of Skyline D in just a moment with a lot of that burst from the Arcane Mage. So Duntelionax actually going to go down first for Skyline D, but for SunSky, excuse me, but it's just too little too late as Skyline D manages to win the match, sheerly just because of those sloppy deaths that they had in that hallway. But what an exciting finish. Ridiculous burst from the Mage at the end.
It shows how well practiced these instances are as well, because I took the time